Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be starting to do the 2020 champion rankings. Now first and foremost, these are all subjective rankings. In my personal opinion, I will rank basically several attributes that I do value about the champions, not just their offensive use but also significance to the game and defensive capabilities and what kind of impact they can possibly have on the game in future. That being said, there are 22 champions being released this year if we do not count Wolverine, Weapon X, and Platinum Pool, because those are kind of like exclusive trophy champions. They do not fit in the standard release of the champions that we have gotten. In addition to that, month of December is going to feature the release of Spider-Ham, and just because obviously he's not out yet, even though we do know his abilities, and if I were to wait a couple of weeks, I still probably wouldn't have like a very solid grasp on exactly where he fits in. So for the purpose of this list, Spider-Ham will also be excluded. That means we are going to be ranking 22 champions that have been released this year. Again, no Spider-Ham, no Platinum Pool, and no Wolverine Weapon X. Right. That basically, as I said, leaves us with 22 different champions, which I'm going to split over in 3 different videos because I don't want a single video to be half an hour or 40 minutes, knowing me, probably longer than that. So we're going to start today with what I consider to be the biggest fails of the year, the 6 worst champions released in 2020. And again, I do know that every champion will have people who love it. It's just because you do not share my opinion, it's not meant to be as an attack towards you. This is my personal subjective opinion, which champions I find the least useful and I think would basically make me the most unhappy if I would happen to pull them and if I didn't have any of them. So we can start with a clear winner, I think, of the Razzie Awards as the worst champion of 2020. I officially will declare Terrax. Right. Terrax had a lot of potential on paper. Terrax's ability set isn't actually half bad. The thing with Terrax is that if his damage output would be even decent, he would be somewhat useful champion, and he could have potentially had, like, I don't know, mega beyond potential by his ability kit, because he shared a lot of similarities with Omega Red, has plenty of immunities, an interesting spin on it, he has a lot of things going for him on paper. Now, in reality, his damage output is so pathetic, he doesn't even make half decent defender because it takes forever to kill you for most part, and everything around him just pretty much becomes irrelevant. His immunities become relevant, his utility becomes relevant, just because he hits so weak. And it's a real shame. I was actually looking forward to the release of Terrax because, as I said, just by reading his abilities, he had a potential to be good. But Kabam just absolutely butchered him with the numbers, and the damage he does is just unjustifiably low. And with that low damage output, he doesn't even make it half decent defender anymore. So yeah, he is, in my opinion, the worst champion of 2020. And to join him as the second worst champion of 2020, we're gonna have Airwalker. Now, the only reason why Airwalker is above Terrax is because if you do invest heavily in learning Airwalker's playstyle, if you do ramp him up, he at least has some damage. He has very tricky playstyle that's 100% not worth it and not worth learning to. But if you do capitalize on all of the things that he can do once he's properly ramped up, he's not bad. He's not bad compared to 2016 champions pretty much, but he's bad overall. Like, the fact that you have no level 3 initially and then you need to ramp him up, and even when he's ramped up, his performance is mediocre at best, just puts him so far behind. Other than that, he pretty much, if I'm not mistaken, had no immunities. His ability kit is, again, very pale, largely defensive centric, and he doesn't make a good defender, again, because he willpower heals most of his opponents, and he just doesn't get the job done. Nowhere. No defense, no offense, there are no vital synergies, nothing like that. So getting Airwalker is nice as a cool champion to look at. His animations are cool. His special 3 attack is one of the prettiest in game, if you will. But relatively, what Airwalker will do to your count, not much. Anything he can do, ton of other champions can do so much better. Therefore, it is pretty much a waste of catalyst to invest in him, unless you're doing it for defensive reasons, for some purpose. But you can't even really see him on alliance or defense much, to be honest. So yeah, the contest could delete this character and hardly anyone would notice. that is how little I think of Airwalker, and that's why he's the second worst champion of 2020 in my opinion. And the third champion, the third worst champion of 2020, and it actually kind of breaks my heart at this point, because it's going to be Immortal Hulk. Now, the reason why I pick Immortal Hulk is because he's a crappy defender. He's absolutely 100% unusable in Alliance War offense, for instance, just because of the existence of Assassin Mastery. Any type of ability accuracy reduction makes him unusable. His rotation is unrealistic and RNG dependent, so it's very tricky to do to build up the rage. You have to remember and execute everything perfectly, what you're meant to do. Build up to nearly 3 bars of power, build up the rages, drop the heavy attack, chain into level 2, then again go double medium, start the heavy attack, drop a level 1, pray to God it stuns, because it has like 60% chance to stun, and then you're getting somewhere. And the tricky thing is, you lose about 5% health if you play him perfectly every fight and not take any other damage. So the whole mechanism there is flawed, and it's just not realistic. Not realistic to expect and rely on this champion. Now, I'm not saying he can't be used anywhere, and here is the bigger difference of him and Terrax and Airwalker. Why he beats them out is because in ideal conditions, and if AI cooperates, and if everything else happens perfectly, you can get some good, decent results. You can shoot a good video, you can do something. But when push comes to shove, he will never, ever be a champion you go to for any meaningful damage or utility. If you're gonna end up using him, it's just gonna be a happenstance, just because you happen to have him, I don't know, pulled as a 6-star or something, or because he happens to be poison immune. But overall, he has pretty much the most stupid playstyle that we have had in a game, where it's very tricky to execute, relies extremely heavily on RNG, absolutely lacks utility, and even if you do everything perfectly, you still net negative health. So yeah, it just seems kind of a pointless of a character and pointless of an investment. So unfortunately, I think Immortal Hulk is the third worst champion of 2020. I'm gonna move on to spot 19, or in this case, the fourth worst champion. Is gonna be Moleman. Now, the reason why Moleman kind of beats out the other guys, because he's definitely not a great champion either, is because there are some things you can actually use the character for, and there are some interesting interactions where you can go with that. For instance, his shock immunity still is relatively rare, but the guaranteed crits, the ability to spam some debuffs, and again, Moleman, quite similarly to Terrax, and they both came out in the same month, I believe, had quite a bit of potential. The downfall of Moleman is that all of his mechanics just don't quite seem worth it. His quote-unquote OP, Mega, and Rage state expires too quickly, compared, let's say, to a champion that's relatively similar, Captain Marvel movie version, right? His charges expire quicker, he can gain less total charges, he builds them up slower, where with a heavy attack you gain 1, and yeah, the build-up is a lot slower. When you enter your damage mode, you lose significant amount of your utility, because your true accuracy is long gone, and also your ability to shrug off debuffs is long gone. And it just seems like a contradictory character, where the harder you work, the less utility you have, and you exchange that utility for damage, but considering he didn't have that much utility to begin with, well, actually, I'm gonna scratch that. If he could maintain his True Strike 2 accuracy and shrug off abilities, and his charges would last longer, he could have been a beast of a champion. And what's ironic is that even with all that amount of bleed and guaranteed crits and access to shock and burst damage and abilities that further increase his damage the more health he loses, I think that's his signature ability, he still doesn't compete in damage department even when everything goes perfect. So you have a champion who can easily get outshined in utility department, who's tricky to manage, takes a while to build up, and then at end of all of it, once you have done everything perfectly, he just doesn't show up. He just doesn't impress in any department. But that being said, obviously, the fact that he does have that access to True Strike is somewhat helpful. The fact that he can shrug off some of those debuffs is definitely helpful as well, even though he loses ability later on. The fact that he has access to guaranteed crits, all of these things could have worked out so well, but the execution of them is just quite horrible. So therefore, he's the 4th worst champion of 2020, in my opinion. And we're gonna go on to 5th worst champion, or in this case, the 18th best champion, I suppose. And that is going to be Red Goblin. Now, with Red Goblin, he has a lot more things going for him than literally every other champion so far. He actually can do very, very respectable damage. He has access to True Strike, similar mechanics, I think, where it prevents evades and prevents miss abilities. So he has kind of like a vigilance and something, I forgot the name of it. But basically, everything he can do, like, is just too much to ask for a player to be able to do. First of all, he does the great amount of damage only when he's kind of like in his enraged mode or the furious mode, and you only access that in like last 15% of the fight, I think, or last 25% of the fight in your initial fights. You get to it quicker if he's built up to like 5 persistent charges, but then again, he's one of those random build-up champions where the build-up doesn't quite justify the effort you would have to put in him, not to mention that quite in most of the quests you couldn't even properly build him. And then he also faces a lot of inherent flaws that would just force people to shy away from him. The fact that he immediately requires awakened ability in high sig. Now that might not necessarily be a deal breaker, but in a game where there are so many better options, most of the people won't even take a chance on him because he's just not that impressive enough. And if you release mediocre champions, then having reliance on SIG 200 is pretty much a death sentence to them, because you can't just get a champion out of the box and do good things with him. Optimally, if you do have him high SIG, highly ranked SIG 200, he can do some of the cool stuff, but even the cool things that he can do get outshined by a lot of older champions. For instance, he reduces Spider Champion evade ability accuracy by 100%. We have Venom, who is a lot older champion rework, who just shuts it down completely and doesn't matter how many percent there are. And why is it important? Because there are a ton of nodes, and typically in all of the more complex content, the nodes specifically increase the evade ability accuracy, so even though you reduce Spider-Man's evade by 100%, they still evade. So that's like one of his primary, strong points, primary things that you would look at the champion for, like Venom, that's one of his biggest things, but he doesn't even do this properly, because in many of the circumstances, Spider-Man still get to evade, even though you quote-unquote bring direct hard counter to that. And it's a shame. I do like the character design, I do like the things that he can do. The problem, again, is mainly that it's just not quite worth doing to ramp him up, to sync him up, and then hopefully be able to capitalize on that. Now, he also definitely suffers from the fact that he's overshadowed by Cosmic Ghost Rider. They both were released at the same time. But even if he came out at any other given time, I doubt we would see much of this guy, just because of the things that I mentioned. Like, if you need to counter Spider-Man evades, everybody's gonna go for Venom. If you need big damage, there's gonna be Cosmic Ghost Rider, whatever other high damage champion. If you're gonna need, well, there is nothing you're gonna go to this champion for, and yeah, that's very unfortunate. So I think he is the 5th worst champion. And next pick is probably gonna be the most controversial, and then it's gonna be in a sense that I think you guys will want to rank this guy lower. And if we were looking at him purely offensively, definitely he would have been probably in the 3rd or 4th spot of the worst champions. But he is a tricky defender. He is a nightmare of defender. Even not just for Alliance Wars, but for quests and such as well. This is not a champion you could remove from game and nobody would notice. This is a champion that has ruined plenty of people's days. We only need to look at this month's Cavalier event quest, where we had Nova on buffed up, powerful from a far lane, and he was one of the roadblocks there because people were struggling with him. And same in Alliance War. He is quite often getting kills on Alliance War defense, and even though he can be pretty much hard countered by champions like Dr. Doom and stuff like that, but combined with plenty of tricky nodes, his ability to auto block and parry on the auto block, and ability to gain power and be hard, and he's hard to be parried, and his level 2 is very hard to evade. So overall he's putting in some work, and that is much more than I can say about the first 5 champions. Like, Terrax, we see him on defense, but I hardly ever see him get kills outside of maybe first month when he came out. Airwalker, you don't see him on defense. Hulk, he's not a good defender to begin with, and he's not good at anything. Mole Man, occasionally you can see on defense. But this guy is a defensive staple. And yes, offensively, he's a noodle. Kaban didn't do him justice at all. Again, he has a quite finicky, tricky playstyle, and if you happen to do everything perfectly, so what? Your damage is still just around alright to a medium, and there's hardly any utility, and you inherit every single weakness any cosmic champion in history of ever has had. You're buff reliant, you want to have debuffs an opponent, you need to have access to your power meter, and on top of all of that, you still need to do the dashback intercept, so on and so forth. So yes, offensively, he really doesn't have anything going for him, much less than Nova, Red Goblin, Mole Man, Immortal Hulk. But defensively, he still can get the job done, and the reason for ranking him this way was largely because if I didn't have any of the 2020 champions, I would definitely be a lot more disappointed to pull Terrax or Mole Man or whoever than I would be about Nova, because if need be, if my alliance needed a Nova on defense, I at least know that he could potentially be used for something, right? So that's why he's higher than those champions, and that is my reasoning. So that is it for today's video. These are the six worst champions of the year, in my opinion, and I will do the second part of the video where I'm gonna cover 10 most average champions of the year, and that will leave us with the 6 best champions of the year. So definitely hit that sub button if you haven't already, stay notified, hit that notification bell, because tomorrow I will be uploading the second part of this video series where we are going to discuss the 10 most mediocre champions of the year. But that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit that like, sub, all the other good buttons, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the